What would you do if a coworker tried to get you fired over a deeply personal medical issue they knew nothing about? In today's story, the protagonist's response is a masterclass in how to handle it. 4 years ago, at the age of 24, my life took a sharp turn. My mom had just passed away from breast cancer, a disease that had also claimed both of my grandmothers. The weight of that history sent me to a specialist for a screening. The news wasn't good. The doctors found cells in one of my breasts that could become cancerous at any moment. They laid out 3 options for me. First, I could undergo screenings every few months, waiting to see if cancer developed, which they said was a very high risk. Second, I could get a single mastectomy, but that would still mean constant checkups on the remaining breast. The third option was the most drastic, a bilateral mastectomy, removing all breast tissue and essentially eliminating the risk. After watching what cancer did to my family, I didn't want to take any chances. I chose the third option. The surgery was supposed to leave minor scarring. It didn't. I was left with 2 huge, pink, jagged scars on my chest, each about an inch long and half an inch wide. The sight of them sent me into a severe depression. I stopped leaving my apartment, threw out my mirrors, and felt physically sick when I saw my own reflection. My therapist saw how much I was struggling and took the unusual step of suggesting I see a plastic surgeon, though her initial thought was for scar reduction. The surgeon presented a few paths: a cream, laser treatment, or implants. The cream failed, and the laser was expensive and risky, so I opted for implants. I had been a natural F cup, so I chose a slightly smaller DD. The change was immediate. My confidence and self-esteem came flooding back, and I finally felt better about how I looked. The horrible scars were now hidden, and I could look in the mirror without breaking down. Fast forward to the present day. I'm 28, working in an office, and doing much better. That's when my coworker, who I'll call Karen, entered the picture. She found out I'd had a boob job when she overheard me and an old friend joking about me going on a plane with my implants. Karen, however, didn't know the reason behind the surgery. By the end of that day, she had made sure the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why. This was Karen's first mistake. She saw what she thought was an easy target for mockery, completely unaware that this single act of malicious gossip would ultimately set the stage for her own downfall. Over the next 3 months, Karen subjected me to a relentless campaign of jokes and comments. She'd make remarks to other coworkers within my earshot, saying I had more plastic than Barbie or calling me fake in 2 ways. A friend told me Karen had even referred to me as a sack of silicone. I think she assumed I'd gotten them done for free on the NHS, paid for by taxpayers, not realizing I'd gone private for the implants. I asked her to stop multiple times, but she was clever, always choosing places like the elevator or the women's bathroom where there were no cameras. The comments were constant, at least 3 times a week for 3 agonizing months. My breaking point arrived during lunch with a few other coworkers. I called something shallow, and Karen, with a smirk, gestured to my chest and said, "You'd know all about being shallow." I snapped. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Do you know why I have these? A few years ago, doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had to get a mastectomy and was left with huge, ugly scars on my chest. I went to a therapist who sent me to a surgeon, who advised me to get implants just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first." Feeling like I'd just dropped a mic, I picked up my food and walked out. For the rest of the day, my office was divided. About a third of my coworkers came to me offering support, while the rest told me Karen was just joking and I was being a bitch. Karen was being a bitch long before I was. I'd reply. Then, the email from HR landed in my inbox. They wanted to talk about a hostile work environment. The email was signed by a woman I'll call Sharon, and I knew Sharon was Karen's close friend in HR. I was being set up. This reveals Karen's greatest fatal flaw, her arrogance. She believed her connection in HR made her untouchable, a miscalculation that would soon unravel spectacularly. I realized I needed to arm myself. I remembered a clause in my employment contract about complaints. I found it. I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated one was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied that page and highlighted the section. As one person later commented on stories like this, paper trails are often the undoing of petty, vindictive people. I was about to create a flood. I messaged the coworkers who had offered me support. I explained that HR was coming after me and asked if any of them remembered Karen's insults and were willing to write and sign a statement. Many were afraid because of Karen's connections, but about 20 people agreed to help. The next morning, I collected 16 signed letters. Each one was a paragraph or so, stating their name, the date and time of an incident, and a direct quote of what Karen had said about me. Some even included bulleted lists of other inappropriate comments Karen had made about other people, from remarks about a coworker's weight to an anti-Semitic comment about another's nose. It turned out I wasn't her only target. At 10 a.m., I walked into HR, my folder in hand. Just as I predicted, Sharon was there, ready to lead me into a room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker in the office and asked, "So is my meeting with you, then?" "No, you're with me," Sharon said. I pulled the photocopied contract page from my folder. "That won't work for me," I said calmly. "My contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer." She read the highlighted section and insisted she could be impartial. "I don't mean to be a pain," I replied, "but I have it on good authority that the person who made this complaint is your close friend, and my contract is very clear." Sharon stomped off to get her supervisor. When the supervisor asked how I knew she was biased, I told him about her friendship with Karen. He asked Sharon if it was true. Her only reply was a clipped, "I can be impartial." This was the turning point. The supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to join them, and the four of us went to review the complaint. By following procedure, the supervisor had unknowingly dismantled Karen's entire power structure, ensuring that truth, not influence, would decide the outcome. Sharon looked homicidal the entire time. The interview was a condensed barrage of questions. "Why do you think Karen reported you?" "Because Karen has had an issue with me for about 3 months, I answered. "What issue?" I then laid out the entire medical history, the cancer cells, the mastectomy, the scars, the therapist, and the implants to cover them. "It's all in my medical history, which you have in my file. You have my full permission to review it." I added, "Karen found out about the implants, but not the cancer, and decided to make it her business to harass me about it. Why do you feel this is true?" That was my cue. I placed the stack of 16 signed statements on the table. Here are 16 statements from our coworkers, testifying that Karen has been making frequent comments about my body for months. They include quotes, dates, and times. What led directly to this complaint? "The harassment began months ago," I said, "but the complaint against me stems from yesterday in the lunchroom. Karen called me shallow while gesturing at my breasts, and I responded with my medical history. I admit I could have handled it better, but after 3 months, I had to put my foot down. The lunchroom has cameras. You can review the footage." "Had you asked her to stop before this?" "Several times, over the last 3 months," I confirmed. "Each time I told her the comments made me uncomfortable and asked her to stop." The supervisor stood up. "Well, I think we're done here," he said, shaking my hand. He told me they'd review the evidence and be in touch. I went back to my desk and started updating my CV, just in case, but then, HR started calling people in. First, the witnesses from the lunchroom, one by one. Then, they started calling in everyone who wrote a letter. By 3:30, it seemed they had interviewed all 16 of my supporters. Finally, Karen was called in. She was gone for half an hour and came back absolutely fuming, glaring at me while I tried to work. At 4:30, she was called back to HR again. At 5 p.m., as everyone was packing up, she stormed back into the office. She glared at me the entire time she furiously packed her desk into a box. Then she started shouting to anyone who would listen that I had gotten her fired, before shoving her way into the elevator and disappearing. A moment later, an email from HR arrived. My case was closed. This story is a powerful reminder that bullies often rely on intimidation and connections, but nothing defeats them more effectively than calm, documented facts. When you stand your ground with proof, you take back the power. Have you ever had to deal with a coworker who thought their connections made them invincible? Let us know what you did in the comments below.